Hi, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the Layoff Legends podcast, where we come together to listen to layoff stories and relevant expertise with the focus on finding inspiration, guidance, and encouragement for the laid off community and beyond. I'm your host, Leo, a former principal PM from Microsoft that was laid off last October. What happens when you're laid off and your visa is tied to your job? Today, we are diving into the world where layoffs meet immigration law, and whether you're on an H-1B, O-1, have had friends that are affected by this, or are just looking for a way to stay in the US after a job loss, this conversation is a must listen. My guest, Tahmina Watson, is a nationally recognized speaker, author, immigration lawyer, and founder of the Watson Immigration Law Firm. She and her team have helped thousands of founders, professionals, and families from all around the world navigate this uncertain terrain. And today, she's breaking down what you really need to know. Tahmina, welcome to the Layoff Legends podcast.
Leo, I'm so honored and grateful to be speaking with you on air because I've known you for a long time, and this is a brand new collaboration, and I'm excited.
There's so much uncertainty in the job market now, not just with our industry, but layoffs, the political and economic environment. So the expertise you're bringing is so valid. Why did you see such a need to start something that would help so many people?
My law firm story is an interesting one. I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. My father was a lawyer. My grandfather was a lawyer. My uncles were and are lawyers. There are just a lot of lawyers in the family, so I was inspired to be a lawyer. And what I didn't anticipate in life was to live in America. I was born and raised in London. My parents were immigrants to the United Kingdom. And so I was born and raised as a British citizen, aspired to wearing a wig and gown, being in courtrooms in the UK. And when I finally became a lawyer, but then I met the man of my dreams in the United States. I was here for a vacation and I had a sleepless in Seattle moment, and the rest is history. I got married and moved to Seattle. But what does one do when they are a lawyer in another country? And that's what happens to a lot of my immigration clients too. They move from one country to another. And if you're a doctor in one country, how do you become a doctor in another? So I faced all of those even before I was an immigration lawyer. So I became a US immigration attorney, and I fell into immigration by accident. I didn't really want to do it. And I started practicing with somebody else. Eventually I had to figure out what I'm doing next. So I was thinking about, do I go join a law firm? Do I do my own thing? And I was very new. And my husband said to me to start your own law firm. And that's how it came to be, because all I really wanted to do was help people, and I needed the vehicle to do it. But what was very interesting about that time, it was the end of 2008, beginning of 2000. That was the beginning of a huge layoff period that was only repeated in 2022 and 2023. You never really know where life is going to take you. But the layoffs of 2008 and 2009 is really what primarily shaped my career, I'd say.
There's nothing like meeting the moment where you have an experience in the way the universe just unfolds. You're able to help people. You've also written several books. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
The books were also actually birthed from that layoff period. So in 2008 and 9, if an immigrant, high-skilled worker is laid off, they suddenly find themselves without lawful presence. And some of the policies have changed now, but at the time, you're laid off, you're immediately illegal. And as I was opening the doors to my law firm, a lot of these people who were coming to me echoed one thing almost always: I want my own startup. Please help me have a visa for my startup. As I heard more and more and more of these requests, I would keep saying, well, I'll research a little and come back to you, but let's do this in the meantime. Because there wasn't a law. There still is no law for a visa for a startup. So I was really using the tools that we had in our toolbox while trying to create a new tool for my clients. And as the years went by, immigration reform was very much at the forefront of discussions throughout the Bush era to the Obama era, and immigration reform came and failed. And it was really at that time that I had stepped up my advocacy. Why don't we have a visa for startups? We need to have one, please. Thank you very much. And when the immigration reform bill died, I was very much about writing and advocating and talking. Actually, one of my clients who became a VC, and he now is one of the most prominent VCs in Africa, he said, Tahmina, write a book. And that was really to talk to lawmakers and policymakers that please change the law so people who are starting companies can have visas in the modern day way of starting companies. You get sweat equity, you're getting funding from VCs and angels, you're creating a product or a service. The law that we have written in the books from the 1950s looks at the law from a very traditional perspective. You are going to invest your own money into a company and you're going to create a business. But that's not how the modern day is anymore. But the laws do not reflect that. So that's really how the books happened. My first one was a policy book. And then in 2022 and 2023, when the layoffs happened again, I wrote another book, which was a visa guide book. And it really came out of the inspiration of all the clients and all the people I kept talking to who were laid off. So there's really a very strong theme in how my work and passion has been shaped.
Let's ground ourselves in our community for a second. And we think about immigration. There are the top 5 countries when it comes to immigration: Mexico, India, China, the Philippines, and El Salvador. And the narrative around immigration is normally around low-wage work, or it could be around offshoring and things like that. But as you and I know, immigration is so much more than that. When you think about immigration and the clients that you have and serve, what comes to your mind as you talk to policymakers and people?
Oh, I love that question. It's like I want to bottle that question for every interview I do. I think of change makers. I think of brilliance. I think of talented people. I think of go-getters. I think of visionaries. People who are hardworking and they see things in a new way in which they can create something that might be broken or something very new in a way that really makes an impact. And it impacts in so many ways. It impacts in the jobs that they are creating right wherever they are, whether they're in Seattle, New York, California, Timbuktu. Change makers create jobs wherever they are. How they're contributing to the economy locally, how they're actually making social changes. I have a client who is an incredible entrepreneur, but she also has a community group of dancers. And dancing has been a lifeline for a lot of people, particularly during COVID. And this group is many, many, many thousand people. But what she's doing is she's creating an impact right here in this moment. And also this community becomes stronger in advocating, empowering each other. And so when I hear a question like that, I envision the people who see things that we don't, who create things that we can't even fathom, and are going to make lasting impact for generations.
I love your answer. It really does shape the sense of we all see the world differently. And that is incredible value as we invite folks that don't see the world like us, who are not from where we are, to come work at our companies and work on our projects. Now, immigration tends to be quite complex, and there's so many visas, there's so many acronyms. It's really hard to keep track. Could you ground us a little bit on the core different types of visas that affect professionals today?
Sure. So what I will say is what's common about all of the visas first. What's common is there are 3 prongs: employer, employment, employee. 3 basic skeletal prongs to any work visa. Now, whether it's a Microsoft, whether it's a school, whether it's your startup, all of the paperwork is about who the employer is. Do they really exist? Can they pay you your salary? Then the second prong is, what is the job that you're doing? What's required to do it? Does this employer need the job? And is there a job? And then the third prong is, can this person do the job? So no matter what visa we look at, those will always be the main backbone prongs. And then they get separated or have subcategories depending on the type of visa. And so if it's a job that's professional, you need a degree to do the job. You have to show that a degree is required and the person who is getting the visa has that degree. That's an H-1B visa. If you're showing that the person is really fantastic at what they do, and you have to meet, that's the sub-prongs of the beneficiary, the employee, that's an O visa. And you might be familiar with the O visa or the Einstein or Genius visa because of the current First Lady's background. It was in the news a lot in the last few years. And of course, that's how a lot of people look at it. But John Oliver was on that visa. He talks a lot about it. So it's really how high on the professional ladder have you reached, and how can you prove that with paperwork? Then there is the E2 visa. Are you investing money in your business? And there's the visa from Canada and Mexico, people who are in a treaty country, the USMCA, I think it's called now, but the NAFTA treaty. And that again, do you have a degree to do that job? So the way to analyze this generally is, what is your educational background and what is the job? That will always be the starting point. But then you take into consideration which country you're from, which country were you born in, and which country might you be a citizen of right now. It may not be the same. It really depends on what visa you have already. If you're in the United States, you likely are on a visa. And what you do after you're laid off really depends on what the visa was when you were laid off. If you're an H-1B, many people will know that you can go from company A to B to C seamlessly, as long as there is a company B and C to sponsor you. If you are on an L visa, which is an intra-company transfer, you move from India, China, Argentina, Brazil, you name the country, you were working there, and now you're coming to the United States for a branch of that company to be here, you don't have any other history other than that company. And so when you're laid off, that becomes very, very restrictive. It's not like you have a visa that transfers from company to company. You're really with that company. And that becomes very challenging. In 2008 and 9, I saw problems, but 2022 and 2023 were really challenging. I had a client who had just moved from Japan, who had spent $120,000. Some of it was corporate, but most of it was his money. And he moved his entire family of 4. I don't know if they bought the house or rented a house. Within 1 month of moving, he was laid off. And the company was not going to pay for him to go back. How do you recoup that money? But on an L1 visa, you don't have the opportunity to sort of move around from company to company. So in a scenario like that, in an L, there was one client who was from a country that has a commercial treaty with the United States. And so we were able to get him an E2 visa. But interestingly enough, then you look at if a married couple, then you look at the married couple and husband and wife and their skills. And then you see who can get the visa, because this visa will allow the spouse to get a work permit. Where is the bang for buck in this for this family? And so for this particular family, we switched the main visa candidate around. We make the spouse the main person, who then purchased a business, invested in the business. We got the approval for her, and then the spouse, the husband, who was the main principal before, got a work permit that allowed him to work anywhere. And you may know this, Leo, a lot of big companies at the moment, given the political climate, are actually trying not to sponsor people, are trying not to sponsor green cards as well. And so that opened up an opportunity for this couple where he could freely work anywhere without sponsorship. And so what is the right solution for one family will very much differ from another, because the facts are different, the visas are different, the backgrounds are different, the countries are different. And so it's a holistic analysis of what works for the success of this family.
How much time do you have once you're laid off, depending on your visa, to be able to make some of these decisions? Because some of the things you just described, they don't feel like things that you can happen very quickly. You have to make immediate changes. What does that look like?
Wow, you are hitting on the nail with this. It is so stressful. It's stressful for everybody. When somebody is laid off, they get 60 days of grace period. And now in 2008 and 9, I have to tell you, there was no policy or regulation that allowed 60 days grace period. It is that period that actually led to policy changes so that there was the 60-day grace period, which was then absolutely critical in 2022 and 2023. So the 60-day grace period allows you to be in the United States. They're allowed to essentially look for another job during that period. But 60 days is it. You have to do something on day 61. And so it's really planning what that is. Are you changing to a tourist visa to make sure you are not illegally here? And in that tourist visa, what are you arguing? If Microsoft or Amazon had filed a green card for you, you are probably in the line for the green card. And the government's going to be like, well, you really intend to live here, so how can we believe you're going to be a tourist? So there are nuances on that front. And so for most people, if they want to get a visa for work and they want to take control of their lives and have their own company, you've only got 60 days to really get things into place. So the example I gave earlier about the couple, they worked with a broker to find a business that they could purchase. Often, if somebody wants to start their own company, and with AI experts from around the country who have been working for big companies that are now part of the layoff, I say to them, look, you have so much expertise and knowledge that most of us lay people don't. Why couldn't you start your own company? The biggest tip that I can give people, Leo, is whether you have a company or not, your rent is not going to wait for anybody, and you have to put food on the table. Find the money to capitalize your own business so you can get a paycheck and make that company sponsor you for a visa. And what was interesting is during the 2022 layoffs that we started to see the trends before it hits the news. And so when people were being laid off left and right, but not necessarily with the 18,000 that we saw in one fell swoop, when those were happening in pockets, I was writing a lot on my blog, in my newsletters, but also in newspapers. And one of them was about, if you're on this visa, you do that. If you're on this visa, you do that. And that led to really thinking about, how do I empower the people who feel vulnerable and disempowered? How do I give them the strength to take the power into their own hands? I think that's what we don't realize. We have it within us. But when life happens to us, we forget that.
It's such a challenging thing. The layoff itself is so disruptive. And so for certain companies, okay, you're laid off on a Friday morning, you have to be out by a Friday afternoon. There are other companies, they're a little bit more gracious, they give you time, but even then it's chaotic. So laying onto that, things like you have to leave the country. Where do you go? Your kids are in school. There's so many complicated things, and I could see just how stressful that is. Is there something like a checklist that you can go through and say, okay, great, this is my status. And let's just say I've not been laid off yet, but yes, I'm here on a visa. Can you start to prepare that if in case this happens, because it feels like you have to take control?
It's a really good question. What I have seen over and over and over again is that those who will start companies will do it regardless of where they are in life. But a lot of people are accidental entrepreneurs. They had had it in their hearts and minds, but they never necessarily had the courage. Because when you have the children and the mortgage and the childcare providers to pay and all the other things that you just mentioned, you need a steady paycheck. Mm-hmm. And what I found was in that period, in that moment of crisis, people just need somebody to hold their hands and say, it's going to be okay. And these are some of the things you can do. And yes, you get 60 days. The moment they get confirmation that they have 60 days, you sort of have a little bit of a sigh of relief that you have a little bit of time to play with. Not much, but a little bit. And what I found is that people were more interested in just waiting to figure out how they can get another job. And some people got second jobs. But what they didn't anticipate is that second job was also going to lay them off. Wow. And so in the 2022 and 2023 period, some people just got hit very, very hard, multiple times. I haven't created a checklist necessarily. Maybe there are some out there, but there isn't really one size fits all because you have all of these other considerations. I call it a very complicated puzzle with very small pieces, and everybody's pieces are different. And the picture may be this visa and that visa, but the coloring of it would be different. And so you really can't necessarily do yes, this, and if that. But what I did in the book is I wrote so that they could have more information and emphasize the things that they need to see. Sometimes you need a quiet mind without the stresses of the day or another noise, a sound in your ear. Every chapter starts with quick tips. If you have an H-1B, then keep reading. If you don't have an H-1B, move on. I was very conscious of the fact that people don't have time. And when you're stressed, you have even less time, but you're also not paying attention. So how could I make sure that they could read exactly what they need to know and not more and not less?
That is so helpful. And we'll leave links to the book and the resources that you're mentioning, because in a time of crisis, you need clarity. Let's shift our attention to the employer for a second. And so the employer lays people off, but then they're also hiring other people. Are there ways that laid off professionals that are affected by immigration can position themselves better to future employers, knowing that they also have to sponsor these people because it's an expense? But ultimately, this is incredible talent that moved from one part of the world to another, but circumstances just so happened they were laid off. How do we position this for employers to seek out laid off professionals in an environment like this?
I really love that question, Leo. And I don't know what you've seen on the ground, but when somebody has an H-1B already, they have already been through a lottery. So for listeners who don't know, H-1B visa, the program itself, is a lottery system. Employer has to enter you in the lottery on any given year in March. If you are selected, if you're picked in the lottery, they apply for you. You get a yes or a no from the government, and then you start working in October. But once you're in for 6 years. More if you meet more requirements. But once you're in, meaning that if you're from company A to B to C, you can keep moving on. There is an advantage for employers. And I think there's a particular advantage for startups. And I am so grateful to have the privilege of working with change makers and visionaries all the time. And they see things and point things out to me that I don't necessarily always understand, or I'm not in their shoes to see that perspective. So one particular startup client said to me, look, Tahmina, we have to understand a little bit more about the immigration trajectory, because if we are trying to compete with the Microsofts and the Amazons and the salary and the benefits, we will lose because we're a startup. But if we can offer them immigration pathways in the future, it means they have something even more valuable than the benefits of that moment. And
It
so
sounds like so if you've been laid off, another opportunity is look at startups, not just large companies. Is that what I'm hearing? Startups can
yes,
also help with your immigration path?
if they're willing, if they are smart and if they're willing. So if you're not starting your own company, look at the smaller companies. The salary may not be as high as a Microsoft might give you, but every employer is mandated to give a minimum salary in an H-1B visa scenario. There is a criteria imposed by the Department of Labor. And so it's always going to be a decent salary. So salary, in my mind, is not your issue if you're in that situation, particularly on an H-1B. But what I have seen clients do is they look at the visa right now, saying we will get you on this visa, and we will look at what the next 2, 3, 4 years and green card pathway looks like. So for startups who are always struggling for funds and saying we can't find the talent that we need, the talent is here, particularly when they're laid off. So maybe employers can have their own strategic recruiting method of looking for people who are highly skilled, highly trained, innovators, who are really shaping the industry. You know, one of the things about the H-1B, I'll say, or layoff, I'll add, and I don't know if you saw this, Leo. Have you seen people leave the country?
I know that if they can't find something, they have to leave. And it's a terrifying thing because if you overstay, that affects you too, because if you have to leave, then you can't come back. So it's its own vicious cycle where I have to leave because I definitely want to come back at some point. And so the race is on to find something. You have to find anything, or you go back to grad school, or you try and figure it out. Many times you may not have something to go back to. And so it's a very, very difficult place to be.
Yeah, very much so. But there are some people who left willingly to Canada. So what Canada did was they looked at the very, very smart policymakers in Canada. They look at what we're doing in the US and they do the opposite. So when we stall processing, they speed up theirs. When we have some sort of difficulty, they'll do the opposite to attract. So when we had mass layoffs of 2022 and 2023, I believe it was 2023, that they created their own program called H-1B visa. And so they basically said, if you've been laid off on an H-1B visa, come to Canada. Now, let's think about that for a second. The people that were laid off had experience with our Fortune 500 companies, which are global companies. And these companies are really embedding and empowering and making foundational changes to technology and the way the globe works. Think about the inherent, intricate knowledge that these people have. But often there are non-compete agreements about where you can go and where you cannot go. But if you've gone to another country, that non-compete doesn't work. So what did Canada do? They took the deep expertise that we have, and these employees didn't have to worry about where they're going and what the legal ramification is. There's no non-compete in a different jurisdiction. And so our loss was their gain. And I think we will see the benefits for them in years to come, because nothing is necessarily immediately visible, but it will become visible.
I love, first of all, your demeanor is very calming. In the middle of this chaos, I can see how difficult this is. How are the clients that you talk to holding it all together with all of this stuff that's going on? Are you getting a sense that the laws are clear and they're figuring it all out, or is it still the same sense of panic and chaos that we're seeing today in the news?
It's panic and chaos all the time. I do want to touch on what you mentioned about calm, and I'm so grateful you mentioned it, because I have to work on it. When I am working on very, very stressful situations, and we're all humans, it's hard not to take on that stress. And I have done that for years and years. But the pandemic actually gave me an opportunity to learn how not to be stressed, or how to work with stress and not be reactive. And it was really, I discovered bird photography. And bird photography really has been transformative for me. It's sort of like a walking meditation. You're chasing the bird in nature. You are inherently in nature. And while I didn't realize what was happening at the time, but slowly I realized, that problem came along. I did not stress out in the same way I would have before photography. And so I have learned that my clients will be stressed, but a calmer client is a successful client. A successful client is a successful community. My first job is to clarify the rules for them and help them create a pathway and give them timelines. You have 3 days to do this, and you have 10 days to do that, and this is the date we're going to file. When you're in that crisis moment, just like you talked about the manifesto, the manual of checklists, you need to have concrete steps to take. So I have taken it upon myself to make sure I share this information all the time. Because if you can find yourself a calming way, because it's difficult to do that. And my method, by the way, is my coloring book. I created my coloring book. It was really for stillness, because if you could take 5 minutes to just be still, suddenly you'll have clarity for yourself. So that's important. So if they can actually get to that point of like, I'm going to create my company, or I'm going to join somebody else's company, and I know I'm going to be okay. There's something about your confidence coming back to you that will enable you to project the confidence to the next person who's going to hire you.
One of the things that is really popping in this podcast and with our community is the better prepared people are prior to the layoff, the better they handle it when it comes, and then everything that happens after. They have jobs lined up, they already have their resume and things ready, they have built mental health habits that help them get through that. What advice would you give folks who are on visas today who have not been laid off but are concerned that this may happen to them? What should they start to put together?
I love that you use the term mental health. I think regardless of where you are in life, where you are in the world, and I hope people from various parts of the world are listening to Leo's podcast because this happens everywhere. Layoffs happen everywhere. Mental health is a really, really important issue that I don't think we necessarily talked about it in these open contexts because there was probably taboo around it. But COVID changed that. And I think making sure that you find your own ways to relieve stress, find ways that bring you joy is really, really vital. So no matter where you are in life and what you think may happen or may not happen, find the way to bring joy into life because that's going to carry you through no matter what. So then about the planning, what is your dream? Every client that I have spoken with who has been laid off, my first question to them has always been, what's always been your dream? And they'll say it was this or that. And when it comes to work, they'll, hey, let's get towards that dream. And sometimes it's, they haven't gotten to that dream because they had bills to pay, debts to pay off from schooling and so many things. So figure out in your dream world, what would you do? And what are the things you need to line up for that? So in your dream world, you may have a startup, you may have an AI startup, you may have the next thing that's coming up after generative AI. What is the thing that you have dreamt of? And then start putting those things in place so that if the opportunity comes along, and definitely I have learned that in adversity, there's opportunity. So if you have been laid off, make lemonade. Make really amazing lemonade. Because life probably wanted you to make that lemonade. You just were too scared to do it.
So it sounds like one, build the mental health habits that you need to be strong in times of adversity. Number two, define what you really want to do. Any other tactical advice that you think folks who have not been laid off yet should think about when it comes to protecting their visa status?
I think going with the flow is an important aspect because you can't control everything. You can only control yourself. And sometimes with visas, you have to present things in a certain way for that moment. And so, example, we had a client on an E2 visa and it was for a particular type of, and a lot of the things that we had to do for that visa, all of it was true. They had to put, if you don't present the case and if you don't do the things that you're supposed to do, the visa will fail. So they did everything they needed to do, but their goal was something else eventually. But what was interesting is as they got the visa approved and they started working on this business, it became what they wanted it to be and then some. And it then morphed into a different type of startup where they're now disrupting a particular industry and raising a lot of money. But had they just been rigid about, well, I really don't like this and I'm not necessarily going to do it this way or that way, they would have failed. But they presented the case in the truest form. They acted and did everything they needed to do for that business. Going with the flow allowed them to succeed beyond their own vision. And the distant dream that they had actually came to the forefront because of it.
Wow, that sense of being flexible is so important. I've been meditating on a Buddhist saying from another interview around this story between the rock and the water. And Bruce Lee talks about be water and don't fight it, be flexible. And in certain times when in layoff, you're forced out. And so you have to be open to the opportunities that come your way. One of the things I feel good about in our conversation, it feels like there's a path. In a layoff environment, you're suddenly thrust into chaos, and we're seeing better tools emerge, checklists and resources that help. There are resources like your content that can really, really help people. Thank you for pulling that together.
My pleasure. I will say that people need to be flexible in understanding that the world is a big place. So just in case your dreams do not come true in America, Your dreams can come true somewhere else. So that flexibility is important to know. I'm a U.S. immigration lawyer. Of course, I'm going to try to make sure that, Eskimos should have ice. But, it's really important to know that the world is a big place. Right now, with the rhetoric that's going on and the student visa issues that we're seeing, a lot of startup founders I work with come from the student population. The world is a big place. So while you want to be in the US, if there's a will, there's a way. That's something I say to every single one of my clients. But just know that the world is a big place. And if you are a visionary change maker, you can actually do that anywhere.
I love that statement. I think that's a fantastic place to land. I have seen tremendous stories of immigrants that are coming in and changing the world. And I think that there's one thing that we need to remind everyone is the caliber of talent, the brilliance of folks that come into this country. And so the work you're doing, I think it's worthy of reminding people just how incredible these folks are. And the laws impact our friends and our colleagues, but my goodness, what riches we have and how much we need to work to keep our friends and family that are affected by this around us. I think this is something that you see every day that you can probably personally attest to.
Very much so, very much so. And we're so lucky to have, I say this quite often that I love living in Seattle. My community cares so much about everyone around them. And to be part of a community that steps up over and over again in times of crisis is something that is unique and lucky.
What can people do as we read about immigration in the news, as we hear about layoffs and some of the stories that are people that are being affected? How can people help? What do you recommend for folks who want to plug in?
If you're an immigrant, number one, know the rules of your visa. Make sure you have all of your important information saved in some cloud or some folder, have hard copies, soft copies. You just don't know when you might need them. One of the things I think is going to be very important for every immigrant, every work visa holder to have is go to the Customs and Border Protection website and download your I-94, that's the proof that you entered legally, and save that. Just save that for safekeeping. You don't know when you might need it, just save it. If you are somebody who does not need a visa, you're here and you want to plug in, be an ally. If you see something, say something. If you see situations in which people are being detained, video that. There are things that you can do with your skills. Everybody's got skill sets. What's your superpower? How can you offer it? Meet the moment. We started the hour with Leo saying, how do you meet the moment? Meet the moment and see how you can meet it. If you are a technologist and you want to help in a pro bono capacity for a crisis situation, say, can I create something for you? Can I create the checklist that you can easily send? For you, it will take 5 minutes. For somebody who doesn't know it, they may not ever be able to do it. So look at your own skill sets and see where can you plug in, but also look at your interests. Even if you have skill sets, you may not have the interest in something else. Combine your superpower as well as your passion, and you plug in into the places where you think you can make a difference and feel rewarded. Go do that. There are limitless issues that need help at the moment. You just pick your issue and go find something to do.
Tahmina, thank you so much. Folks, thank you so much for watching. This has been another great episode with Tahmina. We will leave all the information that she's mentioned with links in our show notes. If you like this, please hit like, subscribe to the channel. And if you have any questions, please leave them below. I answer those personally. And if you have questions for Tahmina, we'll leave her information in as well. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time. Take care.